The following program is an all-language show which includes open discussions on topics related to the LGBTQ+ community and beyond, including, but not limited to mature subject matters such as sex and sexuality, personal experiences, and more. We aim to create a respectful and inclusive space for all. Listener discretion is advised. The views and opinions expressed are those of the guests and do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of the producers and this outlet. Stay tuned for thought-provoking conversations and so much more.
Hi, I'm Saida Garrett, co-writer of Michael Jackson's Man in the Mirror, and you're listening to Rainbow Country with Mr. Mark Tara.
Today on Rainbow Country, teacher, writer, and psychotherapist Wayne Scott joins me to talk about his memoir, The Maps They Gave Us, One Marriage Reimagined. That and more in episode 445, so stay tuned for Gay Talk Radio right here on Rainbow Country.
Hi, this is Emily Saliers from Indigo Girls.
Hey everyone, this is Chris Harder, porn star, burlesque performer, and the creator of Porn to Be a Star. You're listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Tara.
Well, hello and welcome to a brand new journey through Rainbow Country. As I like to call it, a little gay radio show working to give voice to the LGBT community and beyond. And as always, I'm your tour guide through Rainbow Country. I'm producer and host, Mark Tara. By the way, Rainbow Country originates from CIUT-FM in Toronto, and now proudly in syndication across Canada from coast to coast to coast. The Yukon, British Columbia, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, the east coast of Canada in Newfoundland, Ontario, even down to Buffalo, New York, and online. Well, thanks to you tuning in, streaming, downloading, but ultimately listening. Together, we continue to build Rainbow Country into a nationally syndicated gay radio show, as well as being recognized as a #1 Canadian LGBT podcast. So today, his family includes a wife, an ex-boyfriend, 3 kids, and many other characters. Teacher, writer, psychotherapist Wayne Scott joins me to talk about his memoir, The Maps They Gave Us, One Marriage Reimagined. We'll find out just what mixed orientation marriages are. We'll talk about him being bisexual and so much more. Plus, in hour 2, music from LGBT artists, independent artists, voices that we've come to know and love in classic disco, classic 80s, classic house. And on this episode, I'm featuring some classic funk, some queer electronic, and more. All that lies ahead as we start Journey 445 through Rainbow Country. And our first stop, the Rainbow Country Bookstore. Today, author Lori Green reads from her book, Drag Queens and Beauty Queens, Contesting Femininity in the World's Playground. By the way, on Amazon.ca, Drag Queens and Beauty Queens has a rating of 4.8 out of 5 stars.
New York Avenue, where the party began. Mortimer breathes deeply and gestures broadly with his arms at the now vacant lots and rundown buildings on the west side of New York Avenue. The Saratoga was here, he points behind us. And the Chez Paris Disco. He turns and walks toward the world-famous boardwalk and makes a right on Westminster, commonly known as Snake Alley, a winding back street that connected New York, Kentucky, and Mount Vernon avenues in the old neighborhood. The parking lot to the right used to be the Entertainments Club, the oldest bar on the East Coast. Louise Mack, who loved gay people on the building, and the bottom floor was her little speakeasy nightclub, which always catered to gay men. It was one of those places where you had to knock on the door and have a code word to get in. Mortimer continues to walk, looking around, gesturing toward two large parking lots on the opposite side of the street, where the Grand Central Hotel and Studios 5 and 6 once stood before they burned down. He laughs as he kicks an abandoned beer bottle toward the curb. Gay rooming houses and hotels once choked the streets here, and it was all gay everywhere. He turns and frowns as he rounds another corner of the ghosts of properties where it was easy to pick up young men for sex and rent boys, especially in the 1980s. We turn onto Kentucky Avenue, where Snake Alley ends, now a devastated parking lot, as he describes the hotels and gay businesses that used to line the west side of the street. On the corner of Pacific and Kentucky Avenues, on the right-hand side was the coffee mill. On the left-hand side, the Atlantic City Electric Company. Across the street was Kelsey's Restaurant, and what used to be a pool hall and pizza parlor, rooming houses, a little gay grocery store. He pauses and points across the street to a small house, which still has a plant in the window. This is where drag queen Sandy Beach lived. Mortimer points to a little window where he remembers losing his virginity. He shakes his head, surveying the empty space. Turning right on Pacific Avenue, we walk past an empty lot, which was once Lyle's, a gay breakfast place where everybody ended up after staying out all night partying. Two prostitutes walk by, followed by their pimp arguing about cigarettes. Turning right, back down New York Avenue, he summons the ghosts of gay clubs once again, the Saratoga, the Shea, the Rendezvous, where he used to perform in drag, and where he saw his first gay sex inside the club, right on the dance floor. On the right side stood the Chester Inn, its restaurant called the Front Porch, and there was an underground club here called Pucalani with a pool. Across the street was an Italian restaurant, Mama Mott's, where he had his first gay date. It's all gone now. Camp and the queering of Miss America. The corner of New York Avenue and the boardwalk in Atlantic City Beach side is the girls' side of the street, the spot where lesbians congregate to watch the parade and cheer as the cars go by carrying the Miss America pageant contestants. On the opposite side of the boardwalk, gay men stand in front of Ripley's Believe It or Not museum waiting for the parade to begin. This year, there is an added intrigue, since this is the first time an openly lesbian contestant, Miss Missouri Earner Flattery, is competing for the crown as America's ideal woman. Many spectators carry rainbow flags. Some are dressed in drag, men in full makeup, women donning t-shirts with men's chests and muscular arms painted on them. Others wear rainbow kitsch, plastic sunglasses, boas, crystal-studded crowns. Both men and women flirt with local police as they beg to stand pressed up against the parade route and promise they will behave in return. Drag queen Morgan Wells stands in a gown and a headpiece on the men's side. Beside her stands a man shirtless with pierced nipples attached to chains. Gay men congregate, sorted by age and acquaintance, under the marquee of the museum. To their right quietly sits a family with beach chairs and 3 small tow-headed children on their laps. Shoebies, or out-of-towners as we call them, they gawk at the spectacle before them. The convertible carrying the Miss America contestants in the Show Us Your Shoes parade pass in alphabetical order. They wear costumes whimsically representing their states, with shoes held up in the air with one leg as they lean back in their seats and wave to the crowds. Show us your shoes is screamed from New York Avenue crowds as each contestant passes. And as they do, most of them met with cheers of encouragement, waving rainbow flags, while others receive sometimes not so flattering critiques of their tepid presentations. You on New York Avenue now, honey. You ain't in Kansas anymore, someone yells in the crowd. A baton twirling team from Kentucky approaches. The young girls dressed in rainbow-colored leotards draw near, and the excitement among onlookers builds. They all respond by waving their rainbow flags and chanting, "Twirl, girl, twirl. Twirl, girl, twirl," as they jump up and down and continue to wave their flags. The twirlers, a little disconcerted, perform their number. Flags begin waving and people push in toward the yellow cones along the parade route. Miss Missouri Earner Flaherty is dressed in a blue and white baseball uniform and holding up a pair of bejeweled high-top sneakers. As the convertible nears, the cheers increase. She smiles, but she is demure as she waves. Jean runs toward the car waving her rainbow flag, And though Erin's smile and waves back, she appears a bit awkward with this group of locals looking for some acknowledgement of their shared identity. The crowd chants, "Show us your shoes." Show us your shoes, not your midriffs. Mimi on first stands at the top of the risers as she enters wearing a 12-foot-long purple bejeweled velvet octopus stole with arms wrapped around her torso and dragging down the steps behind her. Hair high in a platinum blonde bouffant, her lips bright red, Mimi cocks her head, turns, and drops the stole coyly, revealing a sparkling black velvet swimsuit and a gold and purple shell accessories. She struts, turns her back to the audience and winks. A finger goes to her lips as if to say, "Oh my, I'm so exposed." She seems oblivious to her fatness. In fact, she shows a confidence in her superior form, her extra large body jiggling, hands on her hips accentuating her simple frame. Mimi walks down the runway, stopping at the end. She licks her lips slowly, turns, and walks back to center stage, moving her hips slowly to the music. Mimi on first. Contestant number 1 is announced, along with her measurements, 72, 48, 72. The crowd cheers and applauds, and she bends over slowly, paws and bottom to the audience to retrieve her stole. As Mimi is escorted away by Speedo-clad male dancers, the next contestant begins to descend. Farrah Mascara steps gracefully, one stilettoed foot after the other in a sequined red robe. As she reaches the stage, her robe falls away, revealing a red cutout sequin swimsuit, fishnet stockings, and a giant lobster-clawed hands as gloves. She moves her thumbs, pinching the air, flashing an open-mouthed, toothy smile. She shakes her head side to side, her huge hair just seconds behind her. Farrah struts from one side to the other as she makes her way down the runway, ending in a figure 8, pinching claws held high. She shimmies and jiggles her large body, putting one claw to her mouth in feigned embarrassment. Miss Farrah Mascara, contestant number 2. Her favorite food is chicken nuggets. Her favorite color is the rainbow. Farrah squeals and grabs the arm of one of her escorts as the next contestant appears at the top of the risers in a gold lame robe cinched around her waist. Tina Burner descends in sparkly white platform shoes and reveals her swimsuit, white and skirted, with a gold belt and an anchor and gold tasseled epaulets on her shoulders. Tina's ginger hair is coiffed 1950 style, and she holds a captain's nautical cap. Posing, one knee bent, arms by her side, wrist flex, head cocked to one side, she walks slowly to the top of the runway and puts one white-gloved hand to her mouth as she knocks her knees together and giggles. Tina Burner, contestant number 3. Her favorite perfume is fishy.
When we talk about the LGBTQ community as if it is something that just exists, I think we're indulging in wishful thinking. Communities aren't something that spring fully formed from the ether. They require some assembly. They need to be constructed. Still thinking about the 70s here, when I came out in Toronto, there were lots of different parts that didn't quite fit together. First, there were gay men who went to bars and baths. Most were pretty deeply in the closet. They shared a dirty secret and some overlapping friendship networks, but not much else. Then there were a self-proclaimed clutch of young activists around the body politic and the Gay Alliance towards equality, myself included, who tended to be a bit judgmental about anyone not properly out and willing to throat ram. In fact, one writer to the body politic called us the high-principled Jesus Christ farts of the movement. Then there were the new class of gay entrepreneurs who were establishing the first gay businesses along Church Street. The Community Homophile Association was perhaps the largest organization in town, and it was run by George Hislop, a part owner of several of these businesses. The entrepreneurs saw the activists as troublemakers rocking a precarious boat, and we saw them as conservatives unable to embrace gay liberation. We felt much the same about MCC, the major gay-focused Christian organization at the time. When women from chat, calling themselves the Cunts, broke off and denounced Hislop as a sexist in 1971, it made clear that a lot of women were also on a pretty different wavelength. Most lesbians were much more comfortable in feminist circles than hanging around with gay men. Not that they all agreed either. There were always the lesbian socialist feminists versus the radical feminist lesbians, and so on. Trans organizing was small and generally had little to do with any of us. Trans men were often concerned with distinguishing themselves from lesbians, and trans women were unwelcome in most lesbian spaces. Gay men were generally suspicious, unclear on the differences between sexual orientation and sexual identity. So it was all a bit of a hot mess. I suppose if you see community like a dysfunctional family where everybody fights all the time, you could call it a community. But if by community you mean people who are cooperating and fighting for a common goal, that probably didn't really happen until the 1980s, when we were all faced with challenges that we couldn't overcome alone. This is Tim McCaskill, a gay liberation dinosaur from another planet and author of Queer Progress.
Coming up next, the maps they gave us.
Hi, everybody. This is Gino Vanelli. You're listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Tara.
It is odd that to get a divorce, you tread together down the same path. You walk next to each other as usual. You negotiate the details. Who will drive? Will we grab coffees beforehand? Will we be on time? You sit in the car and then in the beige, white, cream waiting room as you have waited for so many things in your lives, sometimes holding hands, but not today. No hand holding today, not on your way to get a divorce. It is odd that to get a divorce you walk side by side to a common destination. The weight of memory colors the trek with flashes of other tandem journeys. First visit to a pediatrician, new infant in tow. Mountain hikes through fields of yellow balsam roots and purple lupines, toddler in backpack, baby in sling. A wait in line to see the Indigo Girls for the 10th time. The heaviness of it presses down, overwhelms you, makes you breathless, because today there's a jaggedness to your emotions, wisps of conversation that don't feel ordinary, despite their ordinariness. Did you tell the babysitter when we'd be home? Was there enough bread for the kids' lunches? The silences in between, loaded with sentences too painful to speak, foreshadow an apartness when you will be just yourself, and all the memories of the ordinary things of your togetherness will be tucked into albums, dusty in a shadowy part of some place where you will live that you cannot yet imagine, the past, and not the present, and not the future, the documents of the thing that failed. It is odd that to get a divorce, you ask each other questions similar to other times you figured things out together. How many blankets do you put over an infant for a walk in December? What's the best way to part with a panicky kindergartner? Is it time to get a vasectomy? But the questions today are about things you never imagined doing. Did the mediator say the appointment was for 9 o'clock? How many meetings will it take until we're done? It is odd. Derived from the Old Norse ade, the word originally referred to any number like 3 that follows an even number. We have an odd number of children. We will be an odd number of people sitting in the mediator's office. In the late Renaissance, it shifted to mean strange or peculiar, lacking the symmetry of an even-numbered pair, the odd man out. After the divorce, I will be odd.
Wayne Scott, hi, how are you?
Hi, thanks for having me.
I have to say, thank you for being here, to have your voice, your story be heard by the LGBT community. and beyond. So thank you for this, especially to talk about your memoir. This is your memoir. The Maps They Gave Us, One Marriage Reimagined. The Maps They Gave Us, One Marriage Reimagined. That's the full title. Okay, so a wife, an ex-boyfriend, 3 kids, many other characters. This is your memoir broken into segments. You've got a prologue, part 1, part 2, part 3. If you can, let's start from the ground and build up. Give us a sense of what you talk about, in essence, in each of these segments. And let's start with part 1.
In the prologue, which is called Not Holding Hands on Southeast Division Street, we meet the couple, my spouse and myself, and we are on our way to see a divorce mediator to get a divorce. And it's a very kind of sad, dark scene, and it kind of lays the ground for the whole memoir that this is a couple in a mixed orientation relationship. She's straight, he's not. He identifies as bisexual or queer. And they have had an unconventional relationship, and they have tried for many years to fit it into a more conventional container, a kind of traditional straight passing looking marriage. But it didn't work for me, for the guy. I felt like I was kind of lopping off a whole part of myself. I felt a deep sense of loss, queer identity and queer community. And the only thing we knew at that time, was that meant that we had to get divorced, right? That's the prescribed path when you have a marriage that doesn't seem like it's working out. So we were on our way to the divorce mediator, and she gave us her first assignment that she gave us was she said, this is a tough time for couples. When you're going through a transition, you have to begin to talk to people about what's happening to your children and your family. And it'll help if you have a common story. Some story you can tell to people about where you came from and how you got to this point that has elements of a shared narrative, things you can agree on, as opposed to like when you think about a lot of divorced people, they have very polarized, villainizing narratives about the other person, right? And it kind of turns their friends and family against one or the other. And she was cautioning us against that. Excuse me. And as a writer, to have the challenge of a common story, developing the common story, got my mind moving. And I wasn't just thinking about our marriage, but I was also thinking, what makes a good story?
So this is, in essence, an aspect of yourself, your life story to a certain degree, to a certain point. What inspired you to want to share your story publicly?
Yeah. Well, so what ended up happening, even though we started out on the path to divorce, what ended up happening is the counselor that we were working with, she eventually observed that we didn't seem to be making much headway towards divorce, and that we actually there seemed to be a lot of warmth and love between the two of us. And at a certain point in our conversation, she said, have the two of you ever thought about a non-monogamous arrangement? And we were both kind of astounded and shocked that she would ever suggest such a thing. I didn't think couples counselors were allowed to suggest that kind of thing. I thought they operated from a monogamy only paradigm. And so we were a little shocked. But we talked about it, and we decided to have an experiment and try it out and see if we could make it work. So it's the journey. The rest of the memoir is that journey from conventional monogamous arrangement to a creative non-monogamous arrangement that might better fit both of our identities, especially my own as a bisexual person.
So in researching your own life, Wayne Scott, you turn to journals, you turn to emails, album photos, social media posts, friends, family, children. Talk to me about this process of researching your own life and trying to get the facts and figures all straight. And what was that journey like for you?
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing with memoir, it's not a documentary, right? I mean, it's not an 100% accurate factual account of what transpired. Memoir is creative. It's art. Right. And so then I started to think about our marriage as a story, that had a narrative arc and two characters, a wife and a husband, and part of the imperative, right, both for the marriage and for the story, was that they be developed, well-rounded, complex human characters, right? That were credible, that we believed. And it also required me, as the husband in this arrangement, a husband in a marriage that I think is ending, to have as much compassion as I could for my spouse, to truly deeply understand where she was coming from in her experience of betrayal, right? Like a lot of couples that are separating, we had different narratives about what had happened in our marriage. We had different stories. Mine was about, disconnection from the queer community and queer identity, loneliness. I was really lonely, desperation because I didn't know how to talk to her about it without it seeming like I was asking for a divorce. I wanted to be married to her, but I also didn't want to be completely straight, right? And her narrative, different from mine, was about traumatic betrayal, right? Which she came by quite reasonably. So we had very different narratives, and we had to work on somehow looking for where were the shared elements, where were the parts that fit together. The second part, you asked about the structure. The second part of the memoir is called Shifting Tectonic Plate, because I was using all these geography metaphors, and it's really about the historical, cultural stuff that was going on as our relationship was beginning. For my spouse, it was very much some of the sort of ideologies of third wave feminism, right? And for me, as a queer guy, it was very much what the politics of the darkest part of the AIDS pandemic felt like, where sexual identity was very, very polarized, kind of gay and lesbian on one side, straight on the other side, and not a lot in between.
You mentioned this earlier, mixed orientation marriage. What does that mean? Mixed orientation marriage.
I don't love that phrase, frankly. It's from a psychological research, but it's the idea that you're both you don't both have the same sexual orientation. One person is straight, the other person is queer, gay, bisexual, whatever, not straight. And and it sets up a conundrum for a couple to sort of navigate and figure out, because we partnered during the AIDS pandemic, and because there wasn't people in the mid 80s during that time, the word bisexual had a real sting and stigma to it. People didn't self-identify that way easily, because you were seen as kind of the bridge for the virus between the gay community and the straight community, right? And so there wasn't a way for me to sort of comfortably, affirmatively talk and think about my own queer identity, right? I didn't have the language. And so when we were partnered as a man and a woman, the path we were sent down was kind of this one of a heteronormative container where you go through a wedding and you take vows, and it's fidelity and it's forever.
You are a psychotherapist.
Yeah.
There's an old saying, doctors make the worst patients.
Yeah.
So when when the doctor becomes the patient, how were you as a patient when you were in therapy? Yeah,
I was the therapist we saw, whose name in the memoir is Lene, was an exceptional, magical, and quirky individual. And she also was one of the therapists in my town. I live in Portland, Oregon, in the States. She was the therapist in town who was known for the therapist who sees therapists. So she kind of knew how to work with the tricky character of the therapist who is seeking their own therapy. And I struggled, like any client in couples counseling, with some of the things she needed us to do. She needed us to listen to each other's story in a deeply attuned way, to accurately understand where each of us was coming. And one of the challenges in couples work, right, is that they task you to listen to your spouse's story and to be able to summarize and say it back so that your spouse knows you heard it, you got it, right? and you've got to sort of put aside your own narrative and your own editorializing or your own reactions or defenses, in order to be able to truly hear that story, right? So like when my spouse would talk about the feeling of traumatic betrayal, which any woman in that situation is going to feel, it was hard for me to hear. And it was hard for me to reflect back to her clearly. I struggled because it was hard to see to see the image she held of me as this kind of bad guy, this kind of failed husband, this person who didn't deliver on what I had signed up for, right? But the challenge, of course, is like you got to put that to the side. You can't go into this healing conversation from that kind of a defensive, reactive place, and that was the challenge. And we had help, so she was a great therapist we had, and I was able to hear my spouse's story, and she was able to hear mine, and that actually is what enabled us to go down a different path than what we had originally had set out on.
The maps they gave us. One Marriage Reimagined. The maps they gave us. This is the title. Is there a story behind this particular title? The maps they gave us.
Yeah. When my spouse and I first met, we were both in school. We were both undergraduates at the University of Chicago, and we also went on to get our master's degrees in social work from the same place. And we had a common affection for the lesbian poet Adrienne Rich. And Adrienne wrote one of her most beautiful books of poetry is called The Dream of a Common Language. And it includes the 21 love poems, which are these almost like sonnets that she wrote to the woman she fell in love with. And in one passage of one of the sonnets, she says, whatever we do together is pure invention. The maps they gave us were out of date by years. Right. And that just kind of really resonated with me, thinking about our story, because the maps they gave us didn't fit us either. They were out of date for us as well. And, one of the challenges for us as a mixed orientation, non-monogamous couple was invent your own map.
And on that note, we'll return after this Rainbow Country update.
Hi, I'm Agnes. My new record, Magic Still Exists, is out now. You are listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Tara.
This is gay hip-hop artist, the Mangfather Bob Katz. An artist friend of mine recommended that I check out Mark Tara's Rainbow Country years ago, and I've been enjoying it ever since. Mark's excellent interviews highlight all aspects of the LGBTQ community, and he's not afraid to ask the difficult questions that other hosts avoid. And I love the music that Mark plays on Rainbow Country each week, especially when he plays my music. But seriously, Mark Tara has been such a supporter of my music and has turned me on to so many great LGBTQ artists that I'd never heard of before. I'm so grateful to Mark Tara's Rainbow Country.
If you, or maybe someone you know, would like to be a guest on Rainbow Country to get the word out about an upcoming project, maybe you have an interesting story or journey to share, well, simply head over to marktara.ca, where everything is connected, and send me an email. It's just that simple. And you too can have your voice and your story be heard coast to coast to coast.
Hi, my name is Joanne Vanicola, and I'm an actor and a writer, and I was first on Rainbow Country with Mark Tara on discussing the massacre at Pulse Club in Orlando. I realized how important it was for our community to have a radio station, specifically for our issues, to talk about people in the LGBTQ community and to provide an outlet for our stories, to discuss our politics, culture, and give voice to the issues that matter to us. And of course, our artists and the things that we do globally, and talk about culture. And without people like Mark Tara providing a space for this with a radio show like this, then we wouldn't have that voice. So support, tune in. Thank you.
I'm Billy Newton Davis, and we're sitting here on Rainbow Country with the fabulous Mark Tara.
So, Wayne Scott, you talk about your sexuality, you being bisexual. I'm curious to know, inquiring minds want to know, your first attraction was to a man, was to a woman, was to whom?
I would say for me, I'll tell you a story that explains it, if that's okay. And this is in the memoir. When I was, my parents, early on, my parents recognized that I was kind of a gender non-conforming misfit boy, right? I didn't like to play with other boys. I liked to play with girls. I cried inconsolably when they signed me up for Little League. And I got like smashed regularly by bullies at school, especially like in middle school. And my mom frequently would keep me home from school as the only way that she could think of to protect me from the bullies. It was a different era. You know, there wasn't a lot of protection offered to boys who behaved differently. So she kept me home. And in this era, it was the era of Phil Donahue and talk shows and stuff like that. And my mom and I would watch Phil Donahue together. And one time we were watching Phil Donahue. It was a show about youth who had been thrown out of their homes, who were homeless because they identified as queer. And during one of the commercial breaks, they used to have commercial breaks then, my mom turned to me and she said, you know, if you ever thought that you were gay, this would never happen to you. You would never be asked to leave the house. And I, you know, in the typical 14-year-old way, I bristled a little bit, right? But I also a little bit came out and I said, you know, Mom, I think I'm actually going to try to have relationships with men and women. That was my 14-year-old answer. So, my mom is definitely one of the heroes of the story. Very, very abundant soul, and definitely progressive for her time, in the 70s and 80s, right?
So what is it so for me, I'm gay.
Yeah.
I like men. I'm not attracted to all men, but I like men.
I like men too.
So for you, when you are attracted to a woman, when you are attracted to a man, what's, anatomy aside, what's the attraction when you're attracted to a woman, when you're attracted to a man? And is there a difference for you?
Yeah, there is. For me, I think this is such an individual, subjective thing. I mean, I think the way our sexuality evolves is so individual to our temperament, our constitution, our genes, and our life experiences, right? And for me, there definitely was an attraction to both, but what I was capable with both was different, right? I didn't go out with as many women as I went with men. I found men easier, especially when it came to physical intimacy. But when I met my spouse, I felt like I had been punched in a way. Like the physical visceral response I had to her, astounded me. I didn't know what was going on. I just knew that there was something powerful that happened. I couldn't make eye contact with her. I was really, really uncomfortable when I was in her presence. I wanted to be around her and I wanted to look at her, but I didn't want her to see me looking at her. It was this weird thing, and I was definitely, and I over time figured out, I think I'm really attracted to her. And I did. I eventually asked her out. And her first kind of response that she said to her other girlfriends is like, why is this gay guy asking me out on a date? What the hell's going on? And one of our mutual friends says, I think he's actually more bisexual. He has gone out with women as well. I think he's interested in you. And I think in that time, again, third wave feminism, there was a big part of my spouse who didn't want to be with a traditional heterosexual guy, who was skeptical about them, who really was trying to get away from a lot of the trappings of patriarchy that a lot of heterosexual men carried in their identities at that time. And so there was an openness and an interest in being with a guy who was a little bit different.
Okay, so I hope you'll follow me on this next question. But and again, I'm using you as material, as source material, because I have you.
Yeah.
So for you being bisexual and being attracted to both men and women, when you're attracted to a man versus when you're attracted to a woman, does that bring out different sides to you?
Oh, yeah.
Is there a different Wayne who's attracted to a man? And is there a different Wayne when he's attracted to a woman? And what's the difference?
Yeah, I mean, that there absolutely is true. And in fact, I think like many bisexual men, I want to be able to embrace both people I become, whether I'm with a man or whether I'm with a woman. When a man is with a woman, he is often in what is sort of stereotypically referred to as the top role, right? The way I did it was more active, more, it penetrative sex, that kind of thing. Whereas with a man, there's bottoming, right? Which is a very, very different experience of sexuality, a very different experience of one's vulnerability. And for me, it was also this like taboo area because, I grew up with a pretty homophobic dad, who put a lot of that baggage onto me. And so it often felt very kind of like I was breaking a rule, when I was with a guy, and especially if I was bottoming, right? But I also there was also like a lot of room in that experience for growth, and for self-understanding and for, I think in both types of relationships, whether it's with women or with men, we are encountering different faces of our own vulnerability, depending on where we're culturally located. Now with my spouse, I had this is just me, right? I had a much deeper emotionally intimate experience of her. The relationship with her lasted longer than any of my relationships ever lasted with men. I was capable of an emotional connection with her. And I think partly it was because she was a woman, that it stuck more for me.
Did you feel more comfortable when you were out and about, socially, when you were with a woman compared to when you were with a man? Did you feel more comfortable with a woman, being seen out with a woman, compared to when you were seen out with another man? Did you feel more comfortable with that, do you think?
Yeah, I would say it's complicated. I think one of the difficulties being a queer person in a straight passing relationship, well, on the one hand, there are incredible privileges that come with being straight passing, and especially as a boy who grew up being bullied for being perceived as gay, I kind of liked for the safety and security of like nobody was going to go after me. I wasn't going to be targeted in the same way. So I'm not going to lie. That's real. But in tandem with that, and this is, I think, really common for a lot of bisexual guys I've talked to, is you've lost a part of yourself that people do not see, a really important part of who you are, right? When gay men would meet me, if I didn't tell them, they wouldn't know that I was queer unless I told them, right? And in fact, when they would assume that I was straight, they would treat me differently, right? They would be a little bit more protective maybe, or there wouldn't be that same kind of flirty, playful way that gay men kind of banter with each other. I wouldn't get that. Or if I did try to get that going with a guy, they'd be confused. Like, wait a minute, you're married to a woman. What the hell? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then, with men, with being seen with men publicly, that shifted over time, depending on the era. Again, during the AIDS pandemic, which is the period when I had boyfriends, there was a lot of targeting and harassment. That's actually there in the book. There's a whole chapter on what it was like to be queer during the AIDS pandemic and the hate crimes, right? Which I also have my fair share of experience with. And I would hold hands with my boyfriends in public, and we would get harassed. But we were trying to like steel ourselves and we're fighting the good fight. And, and you'd be very self-conscious though, because it was a pretty hostile time to be queer.
Do you think that you could have seen yourself in a same-sex marriage?
Yeah, I mean, when I was an undergraduate and, when I would have boyfriends, I would imagine what our life would be like. And I did imagine it into the future. And I imagine us having a nice condo on the lake, Lake Michigan. We lived in Chicago, and we would go on really great vacations, and we would have fancy dinner parties with guests who were witty and read a lot. I had this whole fantasy in my head. I did not see myself, with a dirty minivan with 3 kids' car seats in the back, driving around town in my sweats. That is not what I saw. So yeah, I did envision that I would have a queer, child-free life.
And so currently you are married.
We are, yeah.
You have a wife. Do you also have partners outside of that currently? Not necessarily currently, but that's okay.
Yeah, no, we have gotten to a place where, we've been together now, we've been together over 30 years. And we've been in this creative marital construction for about 15. And so we've kind of worked out our understanding of how we do this in such a way that you have that room to kind of, be to grow and to meet other people and to have other kinds of intimacies, right? But there's also that for both of us, it's really important that our relationship is primary to us. I mean, for polyamorous people, there's so many different ways people do it, right? And I think I'm actually one of the most vanilla polyamorous people you could meet, because we still look pretty conventional. We're still pretty attached to each other. We like doing things together. We vacation together. We live together, and we still do lots of family things with our adult children. And I have this way of honoring and acknowledging that I've got this other aspect to who I am.
It's interesting because I think and you said the word polyamorous. When you think of, couples that are a man and a woman, and they have a third in it, a throuple, right. Whatever you want to call it these days, it's usually a woman, and a man.
Yeah.
Right? As opposed to a man, and a woman.
Right.
So,
well, we're not a throuple with anyone. That's not our particular path.
Understood. Yeah. But do you just go so far though with your relationships outside of your marriage?
Yeah. Anybody who goes out with me if I go on a date or that I'm with or anything like that, they always know that I have a marriage, that I live with my wife, that it's an open arrangement, that we have a deep commitment to each other, and that we have transparency about what we're doing. So I tend to, when I partner with people, it tends to be other people in open marriages. Frankly, that seems to be where it works the best. I have one man, a wonderful guy that we have been besties for like 8 years now. We've been in each other's lives, and he doesn't want that kind of a permanent partnership. He is just like, he likes his independence. He likes living in his condo. He likes it looking a certain way. He wants whoever he's with to go home at the end of the night.
Fuck buddy.
I don't think that word is accurate though, because we say, I love you. We say, I love you. Like after a while, like
a loving fuck buddy,
a very loving fuck buddy. I mean, this is the thing. And this is why for me, it was important to write a book about it, is because I think our language is inadequate, right? I think our language is inadequate in so many ways in terms of how we talk about intimate relationships, and language controls reality unless you push the language to say more. Right. And so for the longest time with Jonathan, the guy I've been with for like 8 years, we referred to me as the deputy boyfriend, because I was always, while he and I were together, I was always scouting out and being aware of men that I thought would be good husband material for him. I was always trying to fix him up with somebody who would be like a permanent partner kind of person, but it never worked, partly because he doesn't really want a partner. Like, he doesn't want to share his condo. He likes his independent life with his Labrador.
Well, I have to say, Wayne Scott, well said, well done, well written. Thanks for your time. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you. I appreciated it. The warm light comes through the shutters. Carefully, I crawl around my son's sleeping form. At the window, I check the street. The blue minivan is back in its spot. A wave of relaxation flows through my body. The long, excruciating night of the date is over. I walk by Eva's room, the door is closed, and head downstairs. Already I'm starting to breathe easier. Last night's pain seems like a fading memory, an embarrassment, a ridiculous crisis of masculine pride, something I can never admit to anyone. 1 cup of coffee and I will be a new man, a better, more evolved man, myself, yes. Coffee, the newspaper, my classical music station, they will restore me to my familiar self. I click on the radio and put the kettle of water on the stove, and then I notice it on the back of the dining room chair, like a possessive marking, a worn brown leather bomber jacket. It is another man's jacket. Fuck. A surge of fury streams through my body. I walk to the window again, check the minivan, look for other unfamiliar vehicles. Doesn't Henry drive a motorcycle? Where the hell is it? The sun is rising. A neighbor is walking a dog, coffee in hand, yawning. The newspaper waits on the front porch in a blue plastic bag. How could she do this to me? What was she thinking? My heart thumps, a panicked snare drum in my chest. Fuck, fuck, fuck. Fuck, we had an agreement. If we are going to have this creative marital arrangement, we want to honor the place where we raise our family, not clutter it with the distractions of other people. We want to keep our dating lives and our domestic routines separate, at least in the early stages of this experiment. She has ruined the agreement. She has sabotaged trust. He is up there in her bedroom. I can't imagine what I will say. How could she spring this on me? When and how will I exit? Do I say hello? And what's the right tone? How will we explain this visitor to the kids? Will they interact with him? I am barely used to her dating without the surprise of bringing men home to spend the night without even forewarning me with a text or a call. She is still pissed at me. I sit at the dining room table and stew. The coffee grows warm in the brown mug. It is a picture of a yogi in a lotus pose with the words, "Let that shit go." Stupid. My morning routine is ruined. I am not returning to my normal pre-date self. I am crazed. I cannot think of anything else. I look at that bomber jacket. The worn brown leather still has a shine. There's a thick zipper up the middle, 2 sleek pockets. It is the kind of jacket that belongs to a different kind of man, maybe a man who has a motorcycle or even his own airplane, a man who goes on dates with pretty married women living on the edge of respectability, not a worried, bleary-eyed guy in gray sweats who hauls kids around in a dusty minivan. It is one thing for Henry to spend the night here without even asking me, but to add to that insult that he is a manlier man with hip clothes and sleek vehicles. There is no etiquette for this situation. I don't remember any chapter about this kind of surprise in The Ethical Slut. What would Linnaea say now? That word, compersion, is a piece of shit. I hope the kids stay asleep while we deal with this fiasco of poor judgment. There is a movement on the stairs. My heart jumps. Do they know I'm up? What am I supposed to say? Should I pretend that there's no rules she broke? Do I look the other way? I don't want to argue in front of him. What would a cooler guy do in this situation? Should I have made more coffee? A quiche? My gut twists. Eva comes down the stairs alone. She is wearing a cream-colored terry cloth bathrobe, worn gray slippers. Her hair is rumpled. Hey, she says. Good morning. Morning.
That was my interview with teacher, writer, psychotherapist Wayne Scott about his memoir, The Maps They Gave Us, One Marriage Reimagined. By the way, his memoir is available wherever you get your favorite books. And for even more, simply visit WayneScottWrites.com.
Bill 7, to ban discrimination in employment, government services, and housing, based on a person's sexual orientation, was up for a vote at Queen's Park. Most NDP and Liberal MPPs supported the bill, but without some progressive Conservative legislators backing, a divisive split could rack the province. 4 PCs decided to break party ranks to vote with their conscience and support Bill 7. Cabinet Minister and MPP Dennis Timbrell did it to show solidarity for his beloved brother, the well-known drag queen Rusty Ryan. And for me, a gay politician who was not yet out, I had to take a stand. We were known as the Gang of Four. I'm former Cabinet Minister and MPP Phil Gillies. The date, December 2nd, 1986, when LGBT rights came to Ontario.
And just like that, this little gay journey through Rainbow Country has come to an end. For the full 2-hour episode, simply head over to marktara.ca, where everything is connected, and hit the Archives banner. To keep up to date with the show, follow me on socials at Mark Tara. The podcast is available on all major platforms. And finally, I want to take this time to thank you for taking your time to be with me. Remember, we are living in days of making dreams come true, so believe in yourself, and the world will believe in you.
Hi, I'm Justin Ling, author of Missing from the Village. You're listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Tara.